All right, let's begin. Good evening, everyone. This is part 3 of 3 for my holiday special 2023. The third, stave 4 and 5 of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. The first 2 portions are on my Twitch archive. But for those of you who didn't join us in the previous sections, hi Katakuro, hey Alfie, hi Razzie Girl, welcome. For those of you who didn't join us for the first 2 sections and have somehow been living under a rock and don't know the tale of A Christmas Carol, let me give you the rundown. But first, let me get a glass of water. Ebenezer Scrooge is a miserly, miserable old man living in Victorian London. One Christmas night, he is visited by the ghost of his deceased partner, Jacob Marley, who warns him that if he does not change his misanthropic ways, he will, like Marley, will be doomed to walk the world as a ghost, weighed down by the chains of greed and selfishness which he forged for himself during his life. Hi, Silenced Inferno. Welcome. Scrooge is visited by 3 spirits, the first of which, the ghost of Christmas past, reminds him of past Christmases, of past loves, past family, and past friends who showed him generosity. and reminds him of the happy days of his past. The second of the three spirits is the ghost of Christmas present, and this ghost takes Scrooge to the home of his clerk, Bob Cratchit, to the home of his nephew, Fred, and to various places around London and around the world, showing him the way that various people around the world celebrate the holiday, finding joy and happiness even in the darkest of circumstances, the most difficult of circumstances. However, the ghost leaves Scrooge with a warning. Two children, ignorance and want, representing the darker side of the Victorian age, who lurk in the background of all of these festivities, turning Scrooge's own selfish words back upon him. And it is that at that moment, as the bell strikes 12 on the 12th day of Christmas, that the ghost of Christmas present vanishes, and Scrooge beholds a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. Our story continues with Stave 5, The Last of the Spirits. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for in the very air through which this spirit moved it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment, which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. But for this, it would have been difficult to detach its figure from the night and separate it from the darkness by which it was surrounded. He felt that it was tall and stately when it came beside him, and that its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread. He knew no more, for the spirit neither spoke nor moved. "I am in the spirit, I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come?" said Scrooge. The spirit answered not, but pointed onward with its hand. Actually, if I'm gonna do this, give me 1 second. I mean, I guess I could be Scrooge. Or I can read this final chapter. As the ghost of Christmas yet to come. Blah. Alright, there we go. I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come, said Scrooge. The spirit answered not, pointed onward with its hand. You are about to show me shadows of the things that have not yet happened, but will happen in the time before us, Scrooge pursued. Is that so, spirit? The upper portion of the garment was contracted for an instant in its folds, as if the spirit had inclined its head. That was the only answer he received. Though well used to ghostly company by this time, Scrooge feared the silent shape so much that his legs trembled beneath him, and he found that he could hardly stand when he prepared to follow it. The spirit paused a moment, as observing his condition, and giving him time to recover. But Scrooge was all the worse for this. It thrilled him with a vague, uncertain horror to know that behind the dusky shroud there were ghostly eyes intently fixed upon him, while he, though he stretched his own to the utmost, could see nothing but a spectral hand and one great heap of black. "Ghost of the future," he exclaimed, "I fear you more than any spectre I have seen. But I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear you company, and to do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?" It gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before them. "Lead on," said Scrooge. "Lead on. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on, spirit." The phantom moved away as it had come towards him. Scrooge followed in the shadow of his dress, which bore him up, he thought, and carried him along. The phantom moved. They scarcely seemed to enter the city, for the city rather seemed to spring up about them, and encompass them of its own act. But there they were, in the heart of it, on 'change, among the merchants, who hurried up and down, and chinked the money in their pockets, and conversed in groups, and looked at their watches, and trifled thoughtfully with their great gold seals, and so forth, as Scrooge had seen them often. The spirit stopped beside one little knot of business men. Observing that the hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk. "No," said a great fat man with a monstrous chin. "I don't know much about it either way. I only know that he's dead." "Oh, when did he die?" inquired another. "Last night, I believe." "Huh! Well, what was the matter with him?" asked a third, taking a vast quantity of snuff out of a very large snuff box. "I thought he'd never die." "Well, God knows," said the first, with a yawn. "Well, what has he done with his money?" asked a red-faced gentleman with a pendulous excrescence on the end of his nose that shook like the gills of a turkey-cock. "I haven't heard," said the man with his large chin, yawning again. "Left it to his company, perhaps. He hasn't left it to me. That's all I know. Hey, violet skies." This pleasantry was received with a general laugh. "Well, it's likely to be a very cheap funeral, for upon my life I don't know of anybody to go to it. Suppose we make up a party and volunteer." "Well, hydrate yourself, asshole." Fuck it. All right, fine. Cheers. "Suppose we make up a party and volunteer." "Well, I don't mind going if a lunch is provided," observed the gentleman with the excrescence on his nose. "But I must be fed, if I make one." Another laugh. "Well, I'm the most disinterested among you, after all," said the first speaker. "I never wear black gloves, and I never eat lunch. But I'll offer to go if anybody else will." When I come to think of it, I'm not at all sure that I wasn't his most particular friend, for we used to stop and speak whenever we met. Bye-bye. Speakers and listeners strolled away and mixed with other groups. Scrooge knew the men and looked towards the spirit for an explanation. The phantom glided on into a street. Its finger pointed towards two persons meeting. Scrooge listened again, thinking that the explanation might lie here. He knew these men also perfectly. They were men of business, very wealthy and of great importance. He had made a point always of standing well in their esteem, in a business point of view, that is, strictly in a business point of view. "Well, how are you?" said one. "How are you?" returned the other. "Well, old Scratch has got his own at last, hey? So I'm told. Cold, isn't it? Seasonable for Christmas time. You're not a skater, I suppose. No, no, something else to think of. Good morning." Not another word. That was their meeting, their conversation, their parting. Scrooge was at first inclined to be surprised that the spirit could attach importance to conversations apparently so trivial, but feeling assured that they must have some hidden purpose, he set himself to consider what it was likely to be. They could scarcely be supposed to have any bearing on the death of Jacob, his old partner, for that was past, and this ghost's province was the future. Nor could he think of anyone immediately connected with himself to whom he could apply them, but nothing doubting that to whomsoever they applied they had some latent moral for his own improvement, he resolved to treasure up every word he heard, and everything he saw, and especially to observe the shadow of himself when it appeared. For he had an expectation that the conduct of his future self would give him the clue he missed, and would render the solution of these riddles easy. He looked about in that very place for his own image, but another man stood in his accustomed corner, and though the clock pointed to his usual time of day for being there, he saw no likeness of himself among the multitudes that poured in through the porch. It gave him little surprise, however, for he had been revolving in his mind a change of life, and thought and hoped he saw his new-born resolutions carried out in this. Quiet and dark beside him stood the phantom with its outstretched hand. When he roused himself from his thoughtful quest, he fancied from the turn of the hand, and its situation in reference to himself, that the unseen eyes were looking at him keenly. It made him shudder and feel very cold. They left the busy scene and went to an obscure part of the town where Scrooge had never penetrated before. This Victorian language. Though he recognized its situation and its bad repute, the ways were foul and narrow, the shops and houses wretched, the people half naked, drunken, slipshod, ugly. Alleys and archways, like so many cesspools, disgorged their offences of smell and dirt and life upon the straggling streets, and the whole quarter reeked with crime, with filth, and misery. Far in this den of infamous resort, there was a low-browed, beetling shop below a penthouse roof where iron, old rags, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were bought. On the floor within were piled up heaps of rusty keys, nails, hinges, chains, files, scales, weights, and refuse iron of all kinds. Secrets that few would like to scrutinize were bred and hidden in mountains of unseemly rags, masses of corrupted fat, sepulchres of bones. Sitting in among the wares he dealt in by a charcoal stove made of old bricks was a gray-haired rascal nearly 70 years of age, who had screened himself from the cold air without by a frowsy curtaining of miscellaneous tatters, hung upon a line, and he smoked his pipe in all the luxury of calm retirement. Scrooge and the phantom came into the presence of this man, just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. But she had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too, and she was closely followed by a man in faded black who was no less startled by the sight of them than they had been upon recognition of each other. After a period of short blank astonishment, in which the old man with the pipe had joined them, all three burst into a laugh. "Ah, let the charwoman alone to be the first," cried she who had entered first. "Let the laundress alone to be the second, and let the undertaker's man alone to be the third. Look here, old Joe, here's a chance. If we haven't all three met here without meaning it—" "Oh, you couldn't have met in a better place," said old Joe, removing his pipe from his mouth. "Come into the parlor. You were made free of it long ago, you know, and the other two ain't strangers. Stop till I shut the door of the shop. How it squeaks. There ain't such a rusty bit of metal in the place as its own hinges, I believe. And I'm sure there's no old bones here as mine. We're all suitable to our calling. We're all well matched. Come into the parlor. Come into the parlor." The parlor was a space behind the screen of rags. The old man raked the fire together with an old stair-rod, and having trimmed his smoky lamp, for it was night, with the stem of his pipe, he put it in his mouth again. While he did this, the woman who had already spoken threw her bundle on the floor, and sat down in a flaunting manner on a stool, crossing her elbows on her knees, and looking with a bold defiance at the other two. "What odds, then? What odds, Mrs. Dilber?" said the woman. "Every person has a right to take care of themselves. He always did." "That's true, indeed," said the laundress. "No man more so." Bless you. Bless me. Ah! "Why, then, don't stand staring as if you was afraid, woman. Who's the wiser? We're not going to pick holes in each other's coats, I suppose." "No, indeed," said Mrs. Dilber and the man together. "We should hope not." "Very well, then," cried the woman. "That's enough. Who's the worse for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose." "No, indeed," said Mrs. Dilber, laughing. "If he wanted to keep him after he was dead, a wicked old screw, why wasn't he natural in his lifetime? If he had been, he'd have somebody to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying there gasping out his last air. Alone by himself." "It's the truest word that was ever spoke," said Mrs. Dilber. "It's a judgment on him." "I wish it was a little heavier judgment," replied the woman, "and it should have been. You may depend upon it, if I could have laid my hands on anything else. Open that bundle, old Joe, and let me know the value of it. Speak out plain. I'm not afraid to be the first, nor afraid for them to see it. We know pretty well that we are helping ourselves before we met here, I suppose. No sin? Open the bundle, Joe." But the gallantry of her friends would not allow this, and the man in faded black, mounting the breach first, produced his plunder. It was not extensive. A seal or two, pencil case, a pair of sleeve buttons, and a brooch of no great value were all. They were severally examined and appraised by old Joe, who chalked the sums he was disposed to give for each upon the wall, and added them up into a total, when he found there was nothing more to come. "Well, that's your account," said Joe, "and I wouldn't give another sixpence if I was to be boiled for not doing it. Who's next?" Mrs. Dilber was next. Sheets and towels, a little wearing apparel, 2 old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, and a few boots. Her account was stated on the wall in the same manner. "Well, I always give too much to ladies. It's a weakness of mine, and it's the way I ruin myself," said old Joe. "That's your account. If you asked me for another penny and made it in open question, I'd repent of being so liberal and knock off half a crown. "And now undo my bundle, Joe," said the first woman. Joe went down on his knees for the greater convenience of opening it, and having unfastened a great many knots, dragged out a large and heavy roll of some dark stuff. "Oh, what do you call this?" said Joe. "Bed curtains?" "Ah!" returned the woman, laughing and leaning forward on her crossed arms. "Bed curtains! Oh, you don't mean to say you took 'em down, rings and all, with him laying there?" "Yes, I do," replied the woman. "Why not?" "Oh, you were born to make your fortune," said Joe, "and you'll certainly do it." "I certainly shan't hold my hand when I can get anything in it by reaching it out for the sake of such a man as he was, I promise you, Joe," returned the woman coolly. "Don't drop that oil upon the blankets now." "His blankets?" asked Joe. "Well, who else's do you think? He isn't likely to take cold without 'em, I dare say." "Well, I hope he didn't die of anything catching, eh?" said old Joe, stopping in his work and looking up. "Don't you be afraid of that," returned the woman. "I ain't so fond of his company that I'd loiter about him for such things if he did. You may look through that shirt until your eyes ache, but you won't find a hole in it nor a threadbare place. Best he had, fine one tooth, they'd have wasted it if it hadn't been for me. Oh, what do you call wasting of it? Asked old Joe. I'm putting it on him to be buried in, for to be sure, replied the woman with a laugh. Somebody was fool enough to do it, but I took it off again. If calico ain't good enough for such a purpose, it ain't good enough for anything. It's quite becoming. It's quite as becoming to the body. He can't look uglier than he did in that one. Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror. As they sat grouped about their spoil in the scanty light afforded by the old man's lamp, he viewed them with a detestation and disgust, which could hardly have been greater though they had been obscene demons marketing the corpse itself. "Ha, ha!" laughed the same woman when old Joe, producing a flannel bag with money in it, told out their several gains upon the ground. "This is the end of it, you see. He frightened every one away from him when he was alive to profit us when he was dead. Ha, ha, ha!" "Spirit," said Scrooge, shuddering from head to foot. I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heaven, what is this?" He recoiled in terror, for the scene had changed, and now he almost touched a bed. A bare, uncurtained bed, on which, beneath a ragged sheet, there lay a something covered up, which, though it was dumb, announced itself in awful language. The room was very dark, too dark to be observed with any accuracy. The Scrooge glanced about it, in obedience to a secret impulse, anxious to know what kind of room it was. A pale light, rising in the outer air, fell straight upon the bed, and on it, plundered and bereft, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this man. Scrooge glanced towards the phantom. His steady hand was pointed to the head. The cover was so carelessly adjusted that the slightest raising of it, the motion of a finger on Scrooge's part, would have disclosed the face. He thought of it, felt how easy it would be to do, and he longed to do it. But he had no more power to withdraw that veil than to dismiss the spectre at his side. "O cold, cold, rigid, dreadful death, set up thine altar here, and dress it with such terrors as thou hast at thy command, for this is thy dominion. But of the loved, revered, and honored head, thou canst not turn one hair to thy dread purposes, or make one feature odious. It is not that the hand is heavy and will fall down when released. It is not that the heart and pulse are still, but that the hand was open, generous and true, the heart brave, warm and tender, and the pulse a man's. Strike, shadow, strike, and see his good deeds springing from the wound, to sow the world with life immortal." No voice pronounced these words in Scrooge's ears, and yet he heard them when he looked upon the bed. He thought, if this man could be raised up now, what would be his foremost thoughts? Avarice, hard dealing, griping cares? They have brought him to a rich end, truly. He lay in the dark, empty house, with not a man, a woman, or a child to say that he was kind to me in this or that, and for the memory of one kind word I will be kind to him. A cat was tearing at the door, and there was a sound of gnawing rats beneath the hearthstone. What they wanted in the room of death, why they were so restless and disturbed, Scrooge did not dare to think. "Spirit," he said, "this is a fearful place. I am leaving it. I shall not leave its lesson, trust me. Let us go." Still the ghost pointed, with an unmoved finger, to the head. "I understand you," Scrooge returned, "and I would do it if I could, but I have not the power, Spirit, I have not the power." Again it seemed to look upon him. "If there is any person in the town who feels emotion caused by this man's death," said Scrooge, quite agonized, "show that person to me, Spirit, I beseech you." The phantom spread its dark robe before him for a moment, like a wing, and withdrawing it revealed a room by daylight where a mother and her children were. She was expecting someone, and with anxious eagerness, for she walked up and down the room, started at every sound, looked out the window, glanced at the clock, tried but in vain to work with her needle, and could hardly bear the voices of the children in their play. And at length the long-expected knock was heard. She hurried to the door and met her husband, a man whose face was careworn and depressed, though he was young. There was a remarkable expression in it now, a kind of serious delight, of which he felt ashamed, and which he struggled to repress. He sat down to the dinner that had been hoarding for him by the fire, and when she asked him faintly what news, which was not until after a long silence, he appeared embarrassed how to answer. "Is it good," she said, "or bad?" "Bad," he answered. "We're quite ruined?" "No, no." "There's hope yet, Caroline." "If he relents," she said, amazed. "There is. Nothing is past hope if such a miracle has happened." "He's past relenting," said her husband. "He's dead." She was a mild and patient creature, if her face spoke truth, but she was thankful in her soul to hear it, and she said so with clasped hands. She prayed forgiveness the next moment and was sorry, but the first was the emotion of her heart. "No, what the half-drunken woman which I told you of last night said to me, whom when I tried to see him and obtain a week's delay, and what I thought was a mere excuse to avoid me, turns out to have been quite true. He was not only very ill, but dying then." "Oh, to whom will our debt be transferred?" "I don't know. But before that time we shall be ready with the money. And even though we were not, it would be a bad fortune indeed to find so merciless a creditor in his successor. We may sleep tonight with light hearts, Caroline." Yes, soften it as they would, their hearts were lighter. The children's faces, hushed and clustered round to hear what they so little understood, were brighter, and it was a happier house for this man's death. The only emotion that the ghost could show him, caused by the event, was one of pleasure. "Let me see some tenderness connected with a death," said Scrooge, "or that dark chamber spirit which we left just now will be forever present to me." The ghost conducted him through several streets, familiar to his feet, and as they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but nowhere was he to be seen. They entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before, and found the mother and the children seated round the high fire. Quiet, very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were still as statues in one corner, and sat up looking at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and her daughters were engaged in sewing, but surely they were very quiet. And he took a child and set them in the midst of them. Where had Scrooge heard those words? He had not dreamed them. The boy must have read them out loud as he and the spirit crossed the threshold. Why did he not go on? The mother laid her work upon the table and put her hand up to her face. "The color hurts my eyes," she said. "The color. Ah, poor Tiny Tim." "They're better now again," said Cratchit's wife. "Makes him weak by candlelight, and I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home to the world. Must be near his time." "Past it, rather," Peter answered, shutting up his book. "But I think he has walked a little slower than he used to these last few evenings, mother." They were very quiet again. At last she said, and in a steady, cheerful voice that faltered only once, "I have known him to walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder very fast indeed." "And so have I," cried Peter, "often." "And so have I," exclaimed another. So had all. "But he was so very light to carry. And his father loved him so that it was no trouble, no trouble. Oh, there's your father at the door." She hurried out to meet him. Little Bob, in his comforter, how he had need of it, poor fellow, came in. His tea was ready for him on the hob, and they all tried who should help him to it most. Then the two young Cratchits got upon his knees and laid, each child a little cheek against his face, as if they said, "Don't mind it, father, don't be grieved." Bob was very cheerful with them, and spoke pleasantly to all the family. He looked at the work upon the table, and praised the industry and speed of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls. Oh, they would be done long before Sunday, he said. Sunday? You went to that day then, Robert, said his wife. Yes, my dear, returned Bob. I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is, but you'll see it often. I promised him that I would walk there on a Sunday. My little child, Bob. My little child. He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. If he could have helped it, he and his child would have been further apart perhaps than they were. He left the room, and he went upstairs to the room above, which was lighted cheerfully and hung with Christmas. There was a chair set close beside the child, and there were signs of someone having been there recently. Poor Bob sat down in it, and when he had thought a little and composed himself, he kissed the little face. He was reconciled to what had happened. He went down again, quite happy. So they drew about the fire and they talked, the girls and mother working still. Bob told them of the extraordinary kindness of Mr. Scrooge's nephew, whom he had scarcely seen but once, and who, meeting him in the street that day and seeing that he looked a little, oh, just a little down, you know, said Bob, inquired what had happened to distress him. On which, said Bob, for he is the pleasantest spoken gentleman you ever heard, I told him, "Oh, I am heartily sorry for it, Mr. Cratchit," he said, "and heartily sorry for your good wife." By the by, how he ever knew that, I don't know. Knew what, my dear? Oh, why, that you are a good wife, replied Bob. Oh, everybody knows that, said Peter. Very well observed, my boy, cried Bob. I hope they do. Heartily sorry, he said, for your good wife. If I can be of service to you in any way, he said, giving me his card. That's where I live. Pray come to me. Now it wasn't for the sake of anything he might be able to do for us, so much as for his own kind way, that this was quite delightful. It really seemed as if he had known our Tiny Tim, and felt with us. I'm sure he's a good soul, said Mrs. Cratchit. Well, you'd be sure of it, my dear, if you saw and spoke to him. I shouldn't be at all surprised. Mark what I say, if he got Peter a better situation. Only hear that, Peter, said Mrs. Cratchit. And then, cried one of the girls, Peter will be keeping company with someone and setting up for himself. Oh, get along with you, retorted Peter, grinning. Oh, that's just as likely as not, said Bob. One of these days, though there's plenty of time for that, my dear. But, however, and whenever we part from each other, I'm sure we will none of us forget poor Tiny Tim, shall we? Or this first parting that there was among us. Never, father, cried they all. And I know, my dears, that when we recollect how patient and how mild he was, though he was a little child, we shall not quarrel easily amongst ourselves and forget poor Tiny Tim in doing it. No, neither, never, father, they all cried again. I'm very happy, said little Bob. I am very happy. Mrs. Cratchit kissed him. His daughters kissed him. The two young Cratchits kissed him, and Peter and himself shook hands. Spirit of Tiny Tim, thy tiny essence was from God. Thy childish essence was from God. Spectre, said Scrooge. Something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me, what man was that whom we saw laying dead? The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him, as before, though at a different time, he thought. Indeed, there seemed no order in these latter visions, save that they were in the future, into the resorts of business men, but showed him not himself. Indeed, the spirit did not stay for anything, but went straight on as to the end just now desired, until besought by Scrooge to tarry for a moment. This court, through which we hurry now, is where my place of occupation is, and has been for a length of time. I see the house. Let me behold what I shall be in days to come. The spirit stopped. The hand was pointed elsewhere. Well, the house is yonder. Why do you point away? The inexorable finger went no change. Scrooge hastened to the window of his office and looked in. It was an office still, but not his. The furniture was not the same, and the figure in the chair was not himself. The spirit pointed as before. He joined it once again, and wondering why and whither he had gone, accompanied it until they reached an iron gate. He paused to look around before entering. A churchyard. Here, then, the wretched man whose name he had now to learn lay underneath the ground. It was a worthy place, walled in by houses, overrun by grass and weeds, the growth of vegetation's death, not life, choked up with too much burying, fat with repeated appetite. A worthy place. The spirit stood among the graves, and he pointed down to one. Scrooge advanced towards it, trembling. The phantom was exactly as it had been, but he dreaded that he saw new meaning in its solemn shape. "Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point," said Scrooge, "answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the things that will be, or are they shadows of things that may be only?" Still the ghost pointed downwards, to the grave by which it stood. "Well, men's courses will foreshadow certain ends, to which, if persevered in, they must lead," said Scrooge. "But if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it is thus with what you show me." The spirit was immovable as ever. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. "Am I that man who lay upon that bed?" he cried, upon his knees. The finger pointed from the grave to him, and back again. "No, no, spirit! No, no, no!" The finger still was there. "Spirit!" he cried, tight clutching at his robe. "Hear me! I'm not the man I was. I will not be the man that I must have been but for this intercourse. Why show me this if I'm past all hope?" For the first time the hand appeared to shake. "Good spirit," he pursued, as down upon the ground he fell before it, "your nature intercedes for me, and pities me. Assure me that I may yet change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life." The kind hand trembled. "I will honor Christmas in my heart. I will try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall live within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me, that I may sponge away the writing on the stone." In his agony he caught the spectral hand. It sought to free itself, but he was strong in his entreaty, and he detained it. The spirit, stronger yet, repulsed him. Holding up his hands in a last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Let's put this one. Oops. Darn it. Fell over. Ah! No! Everything's falling over. Here I thought I was going to get to be cool and dramatic. Instead, I'm going to look a little bit like a fool. Stay 5. The end of it. Drink some fucking water already! Yes, ma'am. Or sir. Or whatever pronouns you go by. The phantom shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. And the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own, to make amends in. I will live in the past, the present, and the future, Scrooge repeated, as he scrambled out of bed. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. Oh, Jacob Marley, heaven and the Christmas time be praised for this. I say it on my knees, old Jacob, on my knees. He was so fluttered and so glowing with his good intentions that his broken voice would scarcely answer to his call. He had been sobbing violently in his conflict with the spirit, and his face was wet with tears. They're not torn down, cried Scrooge, folding one of his bed curtains in his arms. They're not torn down, rings and all. They're here. I'm here. The shadows of the things that would have been may be dispelled. They will be. I know they will. His hands were busy with his garments all this time, turning them inside out, putting them on upside down, tearing them, mislaying them, making them parties to every kind of extravagance. I don't know what to do, cried Scrooge, laughing and crying with his same breath and making a perfect lacone of himself with his stockings. I'm as light as a feather. I'm as gilded, happy as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. I'm as giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas to everybody. A Happy New Year to all the world. Hello here, whoop! Hello! He'd frisked into the sitting room and was now standing there, perfectly winded. There's the saucepan that the gruel is in. There's the door by which the ghost of Jacob Marley entered. There's the corner where the ghost of Christmas present sat. There's the window where I saw the wandering spirits. It's all right. It's all true. It all happened. Really, for a man who had been out of practice for so many years, it was a splendid laugh, a most illustrious laugh, the father of a long, long line of brilliant laughs. I don't know what day of the month it is. I don't know how long I've been among the spirits. I don't know anything. I'm quite a baby. Never mind. I don't care. I'd rather be a baby. Hello there. He was checked in his transports by the churches ringing out the lustiest peals he had ever heard. God, I'm knocking over my headset. Clash, clang, hammer, ding dong, bell, ding dong, hammer, clang, clash. Oh, glorious, glorious. Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist, clear, bright, jovial, stirring, cold, cold, cold piping for the blood to dance to, golden sunlight, heavenly sky, sweet fresh air, merry bells. Ah, glorious, glorious. What is today? Cried Scrooge, calling downward to a boy in Sunday clothes who had perhaps loitered in to look about him. Huh? Returned the boy, with all his might of wonder. What's today, my fine fellow? Said Scrooge. Today? Why, Christmas Day. It's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. They can do anything they like. Well, of course they can. Of course they can. Hello, my fine fellow. Hello? Do you know the poulterers in the next street but one, at the corner? Well, I should hope I did. An intelligent boy. Remarkable boy. Do you know whether they have sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? Not the little prize turkey, the big one. Not the one as big as me. Oh, yes, a delightful boy. It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my buck. It's hanging there right now, replied the boy. Oh, is it? Go and buy it. Walker. No, no, no. I am in earnest.
Go and buy it, and tell them to bring it here, that I may give them the direction where to take it. Come back with the man, and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes, and I'll give you half a crown. Oh, the boy was off like a shot. He must have had a steady hand at the trigger who could have got off a shot half so fast. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit, whispered Scrooge, rubbing his hands, splitting it with a laugh. Oh, you shan't know who sent it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. Joe Miller never made a joke such as sending it to Bob's will be. The hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did somehow, and he went downstairs to open the street door, ready for the coming of the poultry man. And as he stood there, waiting his arrival, the knocker caught his eye. Oh, I shall love it as long as I live, cried Scrooge, patting it with his hand. I scarcely looked at it before. Ah, what an honest expression it has in its face. It's a wonderful knocker. Ah, here's the turkey. Whoa, how are you? Merry Christmas. Oh, it was a turkey. Oh, he never could have stood upon those legs, that bird. He would have snapped them off short in a minute, like sticks of sealing wax. Why, it's impossible to carry that to Camden Town, said Scrooge. You must have a cab. The chuckle with which he paid this, and the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he paid for the cab, and the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy were only to be exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down breathless in his chair again, and he chuckled till he cried. Shaving was not such an easy task, for his hand continued to shake very much, and shaving requires attention, even when you both don't dance while you're at it. But if he had cut the end of his nose off, he would have stuck a piece of sticking plaster over it, a band-aid, and been quite satisfied. He dressed himself in all his best, and at last got out into the streets. The people were by this time pouring forth, as he had seen them with the ghost of Christmas present, and walking with his hands behind him, Scrooge regarded everyone with a delighted smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant, in a word, that 3 or 4 good-humoured fellows said, "Good morning, sir! Merry Christmas to you!" And Scrooge had said often afterwards that of all the blithe sounds he had ever heard, those were the blithest in his ears. He had not gone far when, on coming towards him, he beheld the portly gentleman who had walked into his counting-house the day before, and said, "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe." Oh, it sent a pang across his heart to think how this old gentleman would look upon him when they met, but he knew what path lay straight before him, and he took it. The guy that was going for collecting for charity. "My dear sir," said Scrooge, quickening his pace and taking the old gentleman by both hands, "how do you do? I hope you succeeded yesterday. It was very kind of you. A Merry Christmas to you, sir." "Mr. Scrooge?" "Yes," said Scrooge, "that is my name, and I fear it may not be pleasant to you. Allow me to ask your pardon. And will you have the goodness to..." Here Scrooge whispered in his ear. "Lord bless me!" cried the gentleman, as if his breath were taken away. "My dear Mr. Scrooge, are you serious?" "Ah, if you please. Not a farthing less. A great many back payments are included in it, I assure you. Will you do me that favor?" My dear sir," said the other, shaking hands with him, "I don't know what to say to such munificent..." "Don't say anything, please," retorted Scrooge. "Come and see me. Will you come and see me?" "Well, I will," cried the old gentleman, and it was clear he meant to do it. "Thank ye. I am much obliged to you. I thank you 50 times. Bless you." And so he went to church. He walked about the streets. He watched the people hurrying to and fro, and he patted children on the head, and he questioned beggars, looked down into the kitchens of houses, and up to the windows, and he found that everything could yield him pleasure. He had never dreamed that any walk, that anything could give him so much happiness. And in the afternoon he turned his steps towards his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock. But he made a dash, and he did it. "Ah, is your master at home, my dear?" said Scrooge to the girl. Nice girl, very. "Yes, sir." "Where is he, my love?" He's in the dining room, sir, along with mistress. I'll show you upstairs, if you please." "Thank ye. He knows me. I'll go in here, my dear." He turned it gently and sidled his face in around the door. They were looking at the table, which was spread out in great array, for these young housekeepers are always nervous on such points, and they like to see that everything is right, making sure everything is right for the party. "Fred," said Scrooge. Dear heart alive, how his niece by marriage started. Scrooge had forgotten for a moment about her sitting in the corner with a footstool, or he wouldn't have done it on any account. "Why, bless my soul!" cried Fred. "Who's that?" It's I, your Uncle Scrooge. I've come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?" Let him in? It's a mercy you didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. His niece looked just the same. So did Topper when he came. So did the plump sister when she came. So did everyone when they came. A wonderful party. Wonderful games. Wonderful unanimity. Wonderful happiness. But he was early at the office next morning. Oh, he was early there. If only he could be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late. Yeah, that was the thing he had set his heart upon. And he did it. Yes, he did. The clock struck 9. No Bob. 1:15. No Bob. He was a full 18.5 minutes behind his time. And Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might see him come into the tank. His hat was off before he opened the door. His comforter, too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock. "Oh, hello!" growled Scrooge in his accustomed voice, as near as he could feign it. "What do you mean by coming in here at this time of day?" "I'm very sorry, sir," said Bob. "I am behind my time." "You are?" "Yes, I think you are. Step this way here, if you please." "Well, it's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir," pleaded Bob. "Well, I'll tell you what, my friend. I am not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer. And therefore," he continued, leaping from his stool and giving Bob such a dig in the waistcoat that he staggered back into the tank again, "therefore I am about to raise your salary." Bob trembled, and he got a little nearer to the ruler. He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it, holding him, and calling the people in court for the help in a straitjacket. "Merry Christmas, Bob," said Scrooge, with an earnestness that could not be mistaken as he clapped him on the back. "Merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I have given you for many a year. I'm going to raise your salary, and I will endeavor to assist your struggling family. And we'll discuss your affairs this very afternoon, over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. Make up the fires, buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit." Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. Scrooge became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Well, some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh, and little heeded them, for he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for good, at which some people did not have their fill of laughter at the outset. And knowing that such as these would be blind anyway, he thought it quite as well that they should wrinkle up their eyes in grins as have that malady in less attractive forms. His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. He had no further intercourse with spirits, but lived upon the total abstinence principle ever afterwards. And it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that truly be said of us, and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, every one. So I just wanted to end this.
Hydrate yourself, asshole.
God damn it! Thank you. So I just wanted to end this stream by saying, why did I do this? Why did I make a freaking fool of myself? Dressing up in stupid costumes, overacting terribly, stumbling over my words, and let's be honest, putting up with all of you forcing me to hydrate. No big reason. Except just to say, why not? Yeah. What's Christmas about? What is this holiday season about? It's about the fact that this is the time of year where things look the darkest. Where the nights grow long, the days grow cold, food grows scarce, and times get hard. And yet it is that we feel the need in the middle of all that darkness, all that cold, all that hardship, to find some way to celebrate. And if the sun and the stars can't give us light, we'll make some of our own. If all we've got left is the food that we've stored up from the harvest in the deepest of midwinter, let's find a way to turn that into a party. Call it what you will. The winter solstice, Christmas, Yule, other holidays that come around this season, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, even Festivus for the rest of us. There's a bit of a human impulse to celebrate during the darkest time of night. And I feel like this story, Dickens's Christmas Carol, really tells the truth of the matter. Better than almost any other holiday story, with one exception. But unfortunately, How the Grinch Stole Christmas is not in the public domain, so I cannot going to be able to do a reading of that one for now. But I hope that these past couple of streams have given you a little bit of light in this dark time of year. And I just want to end off by wishing all of you a very happy holidays, a Merry Christmas if you celebrate it, whatever holidays you celebrate if you don't. And stay safe, stay warm. Okay, Violet Skies, you're gonna bring up the Grinch story in a Savage World session, huh? Yeah. I wish I could claim credit for that. That was a Savage Worlds adventure. And it was a pretty damn good one, too. Alright. You'll play the movie in the hall? You know what? If you go and play How the Grinch Stole Christmas, I don't know if I can join you guys, but I might do that. In any case, I wish you all the best of luck. Good night, and as Tiny Tim said, God bless us everyone. Silence Inferno, I'd like to say thank you very much, Cliff. Aw, thank you. That means a lot. VODs will be up shortly. Good night, everybody. Oh, holy night, the stars are brightly shining. This is the night of our dear Savior's birth.